Nothing happens in this congregation without the dedication, hard work, and creativity of you all, our congregants. So I'm very grateful to Joel Levin, who will introduce our speaker in a moment, for Joel, for your creativity and dedication and hard work and everything else. Joel is responsible for the Niles Township Clergy Forum's a vigil for Ukraine a couple months ago, and for this as well, and more too. For our speaker today, the introduction provided by Joel Levin. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you, Rabbi Weil, and Shabbat Shalom. Good morning to all. I'm really excited and honored to introduce Jonathan Ornstein today. Jonathan will be speaking to us from his home in Krakow, Poland. Jonathan has been the director and CEO of the JCC Krakow since it was founded in 2008. I first became familiar with the JCC Krakow when I went there to participate in Ride for the Living in 2016. This is an annual ride that they do to raise funds for their great work. It's from the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau to the JCC in Krakow. For me, it was an amazing and impactful experience, and I went back there this year to do the ride again. Jonathan is a man with a mission. He has been at the forefront of the effort to rebuild Jewish life in Krakow. Under his leadership, the JCC Krakow was built really from nothing to become a vibrant hub of Jewish life, culture, education, and social activities for over 750 Jewish members that they have in Krakow. In addition to that, the JCC Krakow welcomes 10,000 visitors a month, including dignitaries from all over the world. It has become one of Poland's most visible signs of Jewish renewal. And as if that was not enough, when the war in Ukraine broke out, under Jonathan's leadership, they stepped up big time, and in the months since the war began, they have been providing support and service to thousands of Ukrainian refugees, both Jewish and non-Jewish. Jonathan is a frequent international speaker and media contributor on issues relating to Jewish Poland, and I'm extremely grateful that he is taking time out of his busy schedule to speak with us today. Jonathan, with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joel. Good to see you. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbat Shalom and Shana Tova to everyone. It's an honor to join you. I hope everyone can hear me. From far away in Krakow, where I just came back, landed a couple hours ago from New York. It's so that I'm happy the timing worked out, and my plane was on time, so I could join you. Rosh Hashanah reminds me of a few years ago, something interesting that happened, maybe about 5, even 6 years ago. A young woman walked into our JCC that was looking very nervous. She actually asked if there was a rabbi, but there was no rabbi around, so they brought her over to me. I guess I was the closest thing to a rabbi. My father would be very proud to hear that. He always wanted me to be a rabbi, but it didn't work out. Anyway, she comes up and they bring her up to my office, and she sits down, and I ask her how I can help, and she says, "Well, I don't know. Can I talk to you? I have this story that something just happened to me." And I said, "Of course." And she begins to tell me that a few days earlier, her grandmother called her and asked her to come over to her house. Come right over. Everything okay, Grandma? Everything fine? Yes, I'm fine. Just come right over. Yeah, you have to come over today. So she rushes over to her grandmother. Always nice to see her, but a little bit worried about what caused this call. She goes over to her grandmother. Grandmother tells her to sit down next to her on the bed. Grandmother is at this point, I think she was about 85 or so, give or take. And she sits down with her grandmother, and her grandmother says, "Everything's fine, but I need to tell you something." The grandmother says, "I'm Jewish and you're Jewish." granddaughter had never heard anything about this in her life. She's a Polish girl, grew up without no inkling about anything Jewish. And her grandmother begins to tell her the story, which is that the grandmother was a little girl in the ghetto, and one night her parents brought her to the edge of the ghetto. They handed her over to strangers who brought her somewhere else to a couple that eventually raised her. And the last thing her parents said to her before they handed her over to these strangers, what they were hoping would save her life, which it did save her life, was, "We love you. Never tell anyone you're Jewish." And she kept her word to her murdered parents. She got married, children, grandchildren, career, life, lived for 70 somewhat years after the Holocaust, after World War II. And only that day called her eldest granddaughter over and told her, for whatever her reasons were, and we'll never know what her reasons were. And she told that granddaughter that she was Jewish. She said, "I'm Jewish, you're Jewish, find out what that means." And luckily, there was JCC here in Krakow, and I'll talk a little bit about how we came to be, because it's an interesting story. But she sat down and she's telling me this story, and I'm trying to play it cool, as if every day somebody comes in and tells me a story like this. Every day somebody does not come in and tell me a story like this, luckily for me. But she looks up at me expecting, after she tells me this story, and I said, "Oh, okay, no big deal. That happens around here all the time." She said, "What should I do?" I said, "Why don't you come for a Shabbat dinner next week? We have Shabbat dinner every week." She, of course, says, "What's a Shabbat dinner?" I explained to her what a Shabbat dinner was. So she then came. She met some other people her age with similar stories, and became a part of the Jewish community, and reconnected to this part of her heritage that had been lost to her. And only because the grandmother, 75 years after making a sacred oath, an oath that saved her life, felt the need to pass on this Jewish identity to her grandmother, to her granddaughter, 75 years later. So this story is a remarkable one, but that type of story is happening all the time. Young people today in Poland, over the last years, a couple decades, have been finding out they're Jewish in remarkable numbers. Hundreds in Krakow, maybe thousands across Poland, including my wife, who grew up without knowing she was Jewish, found out she was Jewish and came to a Hanukkah party at the JCC, where we met and got married in the courtyard a few years later, and had the chuppah in front of the building, and we now have a 7-month-old daughter. So for me, the story is very much obviously professional. This is my job, but also affects me very much personally. But I want to talk to you a little bit about how this happens. How do we get to this point in 2022 where young people are finding out they're Jewish? It's not self-evident. So we probably all know that Poland was a very Jewish place before the war. We often don't think so much about it because the Holocaust is so large for us and so painful still, and such a huge event in our history and world history, that when we think about Poland, we often only think about it through the prism of the Holocaust. But Poland was a very Jewish place for almost 1,000 years. Actually, a few hundred years ago, 3 out of every 4 Jews on the planet were living in Poland. 75% of the world's Jews were living in Poland. That's a little bit less than Israel and the United States together today. So Poland was very much a place of Jewish life. By 1939, again, not to say everything was perfect in Polish Jewish history, absolutely not. But there were a lot of Jews in Poland because they were welcomed in Poland when they were kicked out of other countries in Europe, and at certain points found refuge. By 1939, on the eve of World War II, Poland was 10% Jewish. The United States, by contrast, is 2% Jewish. Poland was 10% Jewish, 3.5 million Jews in a population of 35 million. Not that it was all Jews living in the shtetl. We think of Jews as being isolated in Poland, separate from the Poles. Not true for the most part. 60% of the lawyers and 40% of the doctors in Poland in 1939 were Jewish. Cities like Warsaw were 1/3 Jewish. Krakow, where I'm sitting right now, was 1/4 Jewish. No cities outside of Israel on earth are as Jewish as these cities in Poland were before the war. the Russians, Soviets actually invade on September 1st, 1939. The Germans invade on September 1st. The Soviets invade on September 17th. And by the end of World War II, the Holocaust was perpetrated by Germany and its accomplices all over Europe. And by the end of World War II, by the end of the Holocaust, over 6 million European Jews have been killed. And over half of them, 3.1 million, are Polish Jews. 90% of Polish Jewry is murdered. For us as Jews, that's usually, when we think about Poland, the end of the story. Jews were living in Poland, Jews were killed in Poland, some survivors were lucky enough to leave Poland after the war, and that's it for Poland. But not quite. Not all the survivors left Poland. Some of the Jews, for all different reasons, believed in the communism, had family members that couldn't travel, for whatever, there are different reasons. Some of the Jews stayed in Poland. And during communism, again, it wasn't easy to be Jewish. It wasn't easy to be anybody during communism. But in these situations, the Jews usually feel it a little worse. And Jews during communism, the remaining Jews, Polish survivors who had survived the Holocaust somehow and were living in Poland during communism, to avoid anti-Semitism, made a choice and did something that our people has had to do, unfortunately, many times over our history, throughout our history. That is to choose to hide their identities, to go underground. So Jews in Poland during the 60s, the 70s changed their names. They hid their identities. They didn't tell even their own family members that they were Jewish. This is how we, and by the end of the Polish communist period in 1989, there was almost no Jewish life in Poland. And in 1989, when the country was freed, when the country was liberated, when the wall came down, however we see it, when that ended, the period of Poland being essentially occupied by the Soviet Union ended, Poland wakes up, and Poles become very interested in their Jewish history because they had this 1,000-year history going on, this 1,000-year dialogue with the Jews that sometimes better, sometimes worse. It depends on which point of Polish Jewish relations we're talking about. But anyway, they were a vital part of Poland for 1,000 years, and then they were murdered and kicked out and driven underground. And non-Jewish Poles can't continue this dialogue with their Jewish neighbors because essentially there are no Jews in Poland, or on the surface, there are no Jews in Poland because they've all left or driven underground or murdered 50 years earlier. So non-Jewish Poles become very interested in everything Jewish. They start Jewish museums and they start to write books about the Jews and do research, and they listen to klezmer music, and everything Jewish becomes very popular in Poland. But essentially without Jews, right? Jewish interest in a Jewish subject without Jews, which for us as Jews, we're very skeptical, right? If non-Jews pay a lot of attention to us throughout our history, almost always it hasn't worked out very well for us. So we're skeptical when we see a lot of interest among non-Jews, but Poland starting in 1989 becomes very interested in its Jewish past, in this story of the Jews, this 1,000-year story that never had closure because of the Holocaust and because of communism. In 1993, Steven Spielberg comes to Krakow and films Schindler's List. And this revitalizes the Jewish quarter in Krakow, which is the best preserved Jewish quarter anywhere in Europe. I'm sitting next to a synagogue, right? A few feet away from me is a synagogue, which is the youngest synagogue in Krakow. We have 7 renovated pre-war synagogues, pre-war, 7. The youngest is next to me from 1862. And the oldest is from the 15th century, and it's a 5-minute walk away, as they all are. So Krakow has this Jewish quarter. Spielberg films here, and filming Schindler's List here does 2 things. One thing we know about it, it ignites a tremendous amount of interest in the Holocaust among Americans and people around the world who didn't know so much about the Holocaust. They start the Shoah Foundation, this project to take testimony, and a lot of good things happen from what Steven Spielberg did here in 1993, filming Schindler's List. But something else happened that was very instrumental for our community, is it revitalized this Jewish quarter. right? So they had these dormant buildings that were businesses. Nothing was not too much going on. It was decrepit, and this Jewish history started to be appreciated again by the Poles and started to be by tourists coming in. The New York Times writes an article calling it a Jewish Renaissance in Poland. But there's one thing missing from this Jewish Renaissance in Poland. What's missing from the Jewish Renaissance in Poland? Jews. Thank you. I heard you in a thunderous, unified voice. Jews. Yes, I think we as Jews, if there's going to be a Jewish Renaissance, we want it to involve Jews. It's very nice that non-Jews are interested in what we're doing, but it's not that fascinating unless it somehow affects, I think, us to some degree. So the next thing that happens is somebody that's been in the news very, very often lately, very much in the news, King Charles. Before he was King Charles III, he was the Prince of Wales. And when he was the Prince of Wales in 2002, he came to Krakow and he met with some Holocaust survivors as part of his official visit. And he wanted to do something to help them. And they told him they have all these beautiful synagogues that I told you about, but they don't have a senior citizen center. And then Prince Charles, I have to get used to saying then Prince Charles, said he promised he's going to help them realize their dream. And he contacted a Jewish organization when he got back to London, and they had a project of building a senior citizen center. And this organization called World Jewish Relief, to their credit, said, you know what? They did a little research and they found out that there were young people finding out that they were Jewish. It wasn't only Holocaust survivors in Krakow. There were Poles whose families had gone underground, as I mentioned. And maybe instead of doing something only to help the senior citizens, these survivors, they could do that, and along with a bigger project, something to help rebuild Jewish life, like a JCC. So they suggested this project to then Prince Charles. He got involved, gave his personal money to support the project. They were able to raise the remaining necessary funding in London. And in 2008, April 29th, the Prince of Wales and the then Duchess of Cornwall, now known as King Charles III and the Queen Consort Camilla, came to Krakow, opened the JCC, spent the entire day with us. I was King Charles's host for the day, which for a nice Jewish boy from New York City was a pretty cool way to spend the day with King Charles. Since then, he's taken an active interest in all that we do. We send regular reports to his office, and not lately because he's been a little busy, but we have been sending regular reports. I met with him in London and was able to brief him about our activities, and maintains a close connection to our institution and is very proud of his association with us. So Krakow, after the Holocaust, after communism, now has a JCC. What is it? What have we done? What have we been doing for the past 14 years? Well, we essentially are almost everything going on in our Jewish community is happening in our building or through the efforts of our institution. We have a preschool, which is the first Jewish community preschool to open since the Holocaust. That opened 5 years ago. We have a Sunday school. We have BBYO, the Jewish teen organization, is run through our JCC. Hillel, the student organization, is run through our JCC. True to our original mission, we have Holocaust survivors. They have dedicated space in our building. We have over 50 survivors. There's no JUF here in Krakow. There's no Jewish Family Services as well. We are the ones taking direct care of over 50 Holocaust survivors. During COVID, for 2 years, we did all their grocery shopping twice a week. They put in whatever they want the order, and we delivered it twice a week to their houses to keep them safe. We have Shabbat dinner every week. We celebrate all Jewish holidays. Tomorrow we will have 220 people here for Rosh Hashanah, 220 members of our community for Rosh Hashanah. We have a genealogist to help people find their Jewish roots. We publish a newspaper. We have a choir. We have over 300 people learning Hebrew at our JCC. We have Arabic class. We have Yiddish class. And we're the Jewish visitor center of Krakow. And people come through, about 130,000, 140,000 came through in 2019, the last quasi-normal year in the world before COVID. And they come in to see this rebirth of Jewish life, this remarkable rebirth of Jewish life in a place that we don't expect it. I think many of us, when we think about Poland, when we think about Krakow, I sometimes play word association with people, and I say Poland and they say Auschwitz, and I say Krakow and they say Holocaust. But there's something very beautiful going on, this rebirth of Jewish life, which I think has tremendous value. And again, it's Jews and non-Jews working together to rebuild Jewish life. Our little JCC has 70 non-Jewish volunteers year round. I'm not talking about Ukraine, that I'm going to talk about in a moment, what we've been doing, but our general work to rebuild Jewish life are Jews and non-Jews working together to rebuild Jewish life. And the meaning of it is that in a time of increased anti-Semitism around the world, it shows the resilience of the Jewish people. If we can thrive, not only in Chicago and Tel Aviv and New York and Miami, but Jewish life is thriving once again in Krakow, down the road from Auschwitz, the epicenter of the Holocaust, then I think it speaks volumes about the strength and resilience of the Jewish people. And with that, I will take a sip. And that was the first 13 and a half years since our founding in 2009, 14 years almost. And since February 24th, we have pivoted and have continued doing what we're doing, but have taken on a huge responsibility in terms of Ukraine. On February 24th, when Russia attacked Ukraine, we made a few decisions. One, we put a sign on the building saying welcome in Ukrainian. We didn't know what that meant, but we understood Ukrainians would be coming to Krakow and to Poland, and we wanted them to feel welcome. The second thing we did was make a decision that we were going to do all we could to help Ukraine, not what was convenient for our community, not what the building could fit. We have a small building, not what our budget would allow. We were going to fully help these people. And the third decision we made is that we were going to help Jews and non-Jews equally. Helping Jews and non-Jews is a very easy thing to do. You can set up a system to help Jews, and if the occasional non-Jew walks in, you get to help them too and pat yourself on the back for being so open to helping everybody. That's not what we did. We decided that we were going to fully focus on helping everybody equally and have drawn no distinction in the help that we've given between Jews and non-Jews. Over 95% of the people that we have helped are not Jewish. The number of people we have helped directly so far is 125,000 Ukrainians. What does that mean, help? We have a free shop, a pantry downstairs in our basement, in our ground floor when you walk in our building, which 500 or 600 people a day come in to take food, clothing, diapers, toiletries, whatever they need. That's 7 days a week since February 24th. We had the height of our, we realized we're helping these people, feeding them, but what about a place to live? We tried to find them apartments, very difficult. So we started to put them in hotel rooms. We have now about 100 hotel rooms. We had 150 hotel rooms that we were paying for and had about 450 people we were housing at the height of this. It's gone down a little. We're still housing over 300. We've set up a safe space for women. Many people women were talking about our victims, horrible victims, sexual violence, terrible, terrible things we're seeing. So we set up a safe space where they have English classes and Polish classes and job counseling and psychological services. We set up a daycare so they'd have to help them take care of their children. We set up a space on the border to help the people that were freezing in February and March, waiting on the border to cross. We put up tents and gave them food and have doctors there on the border. We give them legal advice. We are helping. We have a dozen psychologists that we've hired full time that are working with different partners that are providing psychological support. We're sending tons of supplies into Ukraine. We literally tons to all different places inside Ukraine, medicine, medicine, food, things that we're buying here and sending it, shipping it into Ukraine. Our center had 35 full-time employees before the war started. We have 75 now. We've hired 40 full-time employees, most of them Ukrainian refugees themselves, to be able to serve this population that we're serving. We're helping more than 1,000 people a day. Now, why do we do this? It's very nice to help. We could easily do 5% of what we're doing and it would still be a lot. Why are we doing this at this level? Why do we feel the need to help non-Jews as well? Because 80 years ago, when Jews were the other, and when there was a different dictator who was interested in genocide in our people, the world didn't do too much. I don't know how many of you were watching this week, US and the Holocaust, We understand that the whole world, including our own United States of America, remained mostly indifferent to the plight of the Jews. And we are rebuilding Jewish life in Krakow because 80 years ago, the world was silent when Jews were the other. And 80 years later, when Ukrainians are the other, we in Krakow have very much learned this lesson and understood that we who suffered because of indifference must not be indifferent to others. So we are standing up and we are doing all that we can 7 days a week, and we will continue doing it as long as we're able to support our activities and help these poor Ukrainians. When I walk into my office in the morning, every morning, there are 30, before the building even opens, there are 30 or 40 Ukrainian women, and it's 95% women and children waiting outside, many of them with strollers to come in and get diapers, to get some food, milk, pasta, whatever they need. Before the building even opens, there's a line. And these people were middle class. Many of them were doctors, were opera singers. We've had all different jobs, and now they're reduced to this. And it's tragic, and it's not going away. And we need to continue, I think, as a Jewish people who know what suffering is, need to help take care of the other, especially now. Shabbat Shalom, Shana Tova.
Shabbat Shalom and Shana Tova. And Yesher Koach, and please don't go away if you can. Jonathan, thank you so very, very much. I'm Jeffrey Weil, the rabbi of this congregation, and we have been listening in rapt attention, really, to this Jewish boy from New York in Krakow. So Yesher Koach to you, and wonderful to have you. I think we have time for just a couple of questions before we return to the latter part of our service. So anyone have questions? Carol, yes.
I have a question, but I have a statement. We were in Krakow in 2008, and we went to a restaurant in the Jewish quarter, and they were playing Lesbian, and it was right around this time, it was right around Sukkot,
Uh-huh.
and I was able to see that some of the houses, some of the backyards had the branches over there.
Oh, so you saw sukkahs, you saw Sukkot in 2008. I see. Right. Right. Gotcha. So Carol is saying, I don't know if you probably can't hear, Jonathan.
I heard.
You heard. Okay, good.
You
Yeah.
heard Sukkot in 2008.
Right. I saw
Many,
sukkahs.
many more today than there were then.
Many more today. Right. Why Krakow and not Warsaw, for instance? What's the relative Jewish population of those cities? And I mean, I've heard something about this or read something about this, but why would you say that Krakow has such a vibrant Jewish life, community center, and everything else, and does Warsaw not have that?
Warsaw does. What Krakow has that Warsaw doesn't is an intact Jewish quarter. So the fact that that we have these Jewish buildings, we have all these renovated synagogues. I think when you come to Krakow, you feel the Jewish presence more. Warsaw was destroyed. If any of you have seen The Pianist, you remember by the end of the movie, Warsaw looked like almost flattened. So when you're walking around Warsaw, you see a skyscraper that used to be Moishe's Bakery, where in Krakow you feel that the authentic nature. And also Krakow is a symbol. Krakow is next to Auschwitz, and I think that paradoxical relationship of a place of great tragedy becoming once now a center of hope and life is powerful.
Right. There's been some reporting on some tension between Israel and Poland recently about its treatment of the Holocaust. And can you talk a little bit about that and how that's we read about it here thousands of miles removed. Is that something that is spoken about of concern to the Jewish community in Poland?
Of course. I mean, I think that the irony is that relations between Israel and Poland were very, very strong before this happened. Most of the time when nations don't get along, it has a lot more to do with what's happening currently. Somebody says this border is that, somebody did that. But here the issues are about Holocaust, how much Poland did during the Holocaust, how many Poland feels that only the righteous Gentiles, righteous among the nations, should be focused on, and we demand a more accurate accounting of this. But these issues are not really affecting us very much here on the ground. You still have a huge amount of Israelis coming to Poland and Poles going to Israel nonstop. If you go to the mall in Poland, any mall in a major city, you hear Hebrew because they come for the shopping as well. So it's relations will be fine. They just the ambassadors are now in place, and but it's complicated. Jewish-Polish relations are very complicated because Poles also suffered during the war, and we suffered. And sometimes it's hard for us as Jews to recognize the suffering of others, and we want Poles to absolutely acknowledge our suffering. So you have a bit of a competing victimhood about World War II, whereas German-Jewish reconciliation is easier because the Germans were the aggressor, and they say, we're sorry, we did this, and Jews can either accept it or not, and it's a cleaner
Right.
relationship. But Poles, it's a little more complicated.
More complicated. Good. Other comments or questions? Fran? Question about how is funding, besides King Charles, how is the funding coming in other ways that you can do what you have done?
Yeah, so our regular budget is 95% sourced in the United States from American Jewelry, and the Ukraine response has been as well. So we have a Friends of organization, a 501c3, like Friends of Hebrew University or Friends of the IDF. We have Friends of JCC Krakow in the United States, where people can make tax deductible donations, of course not on Shabbat, and would help our cause.
Thank you for that Shabbat plug as well. Yes, Stuart.
Why would this not be a national television?
Dr. Stuart Levin is asking, why is this whole story not on national television? Why do we all, right?
I mean, it,
Well, just take what he said. You're gonna
Well, I think it should be more on national television. I did talk about this on CNN. We were in the New York Times in March or April about 5 times. So it's known, but I mean, these stories should always be. I think the idea of Jews helping the other in a place where Jews suffered has incredible resonance for the Jewish people, and is really a Kiddush Hashem. That's, we do it to help, but the fact that also it's, let it reflect well on Jews is also a good thing. I travel around the world speaking about this. I was just in New York for a few days because Federation in New York brought me in to talk about Ukraine. I'm speaking about it all the time. I'm speaking to you about it, and I'm happy to get the message out.
Right. I think what Stuart's actually saying is, why isn't this presentation even on national television? Right. Yeah, I get it. Yes, because we're so compelled by it. Yes.
I think that your streaming of your services should be on national television.
Yes, absolutely. The sermons in particular. Thank you.
The sermons, absolutely, should be on 60 Minutes.
Yes, Stuart Manowith. Jeff Kaiser. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong place. Yes, here's Stuart. Jeff.
Much more distant part of Poland, where it's a little, my recollection was it's a little less Jewish friendly up in the northeastern part. In Tukochin, there's they have a Purim spiel every year. I wonder if you're familiar with it, and you know whether or not they still have it, because it was a remarkable thing to see.
Did you hear that? A Purim spiel in Cochin, Jeff?
In Tikochin, I believe they still do. It's fascinating. So, big cities like Krakow and Warsaw that have a Jewish population, and we have the Jewish Culture Festival in Krakow, which is the largest Jewish culture festival in the world, started by 2 non-Jews, and it's one of whom is still running it in its 32nd year. But it's really amazing. A few years ago, one of our interns did a research project and realized that there were about 55, and this was years ago, 55 Jewish festivals going on in Poland. And I would say the vast majority, probably 50 of those, are in places where there are no Jews anymore. So Poland, Poland, it's very complicated, this history, this relationship with the Jews that was good and bad, good and bad, good and bad, and then fell off a cliff. And we sometimes forget about the good and only see the bad. But very many Poles are interested in Jewish history. We have hundreds and thousands of Poles are studying Jewish subjects and are working in Jewish institutions. And there's a healing process that's going on.
Right, so I'll just say the last comment or question, then we'll return to our award-winning Shabbat service, which is I think the question is like the depth and the sincerity of that fascination or interest in things Jewish there, particularly not in communities where there are no Jews, and that's, if it's just sort of a fetishized Jewishness interest, then that would be, I guess, of some concern. And but what you're describing is something else. I did read an article about this bobblehead figure of a Jewish figure with that people are using as like a talisman for good luck and so forth. And so, how would you put that in context of everything else? And then we'll conclude.
I think the way to look at Poland and its history with the Jews is a little bit about the United States and Native American culture. Only until very recently did nobody for hundreds of years thought it was any problem, or certainly, the Cleveland Indians and the Washington Redskins, I'm not talking about any hockey teams in Chicago, have had no problem using Native American imagery. And only recently do we realize that it somehow could be offensive, saying that they're fierce and going like this at Atlanta Brave games. So I think that when there is not much of a visible culture, when that people isn't very visible in a society, the society can fetishize that people, and that happened in the United States with Native American culture, and I think that's the case in Poland, as Poland is a place without many Jews, but has the shadow of the Jews and the long Jewish presence. So I think people, the thing that they're saying, you can see paintings of Jews holding coins and dolls with Jews holding coins, because for the Poles, the Jews were the business people. They were the merchants. They were the middle class. And for them, Jews symbolize business and prosperity. So they don't realize that they're really offending anybody, because there's nobody around too much telling them that. So we're talking to them about that, and we're doing it. But they don't see it as anti-Semitic. They essentially say, why is it anti-Semitic? We think Jews are good at this. They don't quite understand. It's not the multicultural society that the United States is, that we have to be a little more mindful of who the other are. Poland is about 95% Polish white Catholic today, and they don't necessarily have all that cultural sensitivity that we've been forced to have, and only recently in the United States, mind you.
Okay, good. Interesting. We have to conclude about Lee Levin, yes.
Jonathan's left an address for us.
Gotcha. Okay, so Jonathan put an address in but I'll get that address too. Is that the American Friends address?
Yeah, somebody else.
Well, yeah. We'll publicize that in our congregation.
And I did notice on your website you have a few different organizations that if people would like to Ukraine, we'd be honored to join that list of organizations.
Consider it done. We'll make it so. So thank you so very, very much, Jonathan Ornstein, and thank you, Joel Levin, as well, for helping to arrange this and everything that you do. So, Yasher Koach, and Shabbat Shalom, and Mazel Tov on your baby.
Thank you.
Mazel Tov.
Shana Tova to you and all my friends in Chicago.
Shana Tova. Thank you. Thank you.
Be well. Shana Tova. Thank you.